So we could create this from the start. Everything's patterned, and then you could do measurements by details for all sizes. You could do size chart. If you add shrinkage, we have a before and after wash shrinkage in the system. So if I was to add some kind of shrinkage, I could say I added 5%. It gives you by size what the shrinkage is. I don't know if you guys are dealing with shrinkage or not. And then afterwards, when you're doing costing markers, you could append to this existing style. So you could do the costing for self, and then you could do costing for other fabric lining or contrast or etc. And you could put all this into one Excel sheet. Okay, so all this information could be outputted from the CAD system. I recommend first thing is just moving pieces around. Okay, zooming in, zooming out, so you get kind of comfortable with the system. Okay. So this is something once you get to know the system, something you'll be able to do. But right now, you have to learn the basics, right? So that's what we're trying to cover. I'm just showing you what's possible in the system. Okay. So first thing, you need to kind of practice double clicking inside a piece. It's simple stuff, but it helps you, right? So if you double click on a point, get to know the point types, right? Okay, so if you hold the piece, okay, you hold the left button mouse and you can move the pieces around, okay, select different things. You can also group select and move pieces as a group, okay. Zooming in, zooming out. You roll the wheel forward to zoom in, and then roll the wheel backwards to zoom out, okay. And basically, wherever the cursor is, so if I move my mouse here, you'll see a jump because it's centering to the middle of the work area. And then you'll proceed to zoom in, okay? So if you move the mouse here, you zoom there, you can zoom out, move the mouse this way, okay? And when you zoom in and you want to quickly zoom out, you tap the wheel. So when you tap the wheel, it zooms out to see all the pieces, okay? And that's also on the keyboard home. Usually people use the mouse to tap the wheel, okay? If you select and hold the control and tap the wheel, then you should zoom into the selected piece. I'm not sure why it's not doing it for mine. It's because I have group select. Okay, so make sure you deselect the group before you do that. Okay. Now you could also toggle in the piece bar, right? So you don't have to click it from the work area. You could click here. Okay. Now when you say delete, it removes it from the work area. If you make some changes, it's going to ask you, do you want to keep the change or not? Everything's temporary until you save to the file. Okay. So if I make a change here, let me say I delete this point and then say delete. This should be a message. Would you like to save changes for the piece? If you say yes, this is still temporary until you actually save to the file. Okay, nothing's until you save it, all changes are temporary. Okay. Now, if you look on the piece bar, you have some numbers here. Okay, it gives you the piece name, and then it says 1, and then 2, and then 2 and 2. Okay, so the first number is the order. So if you have 12 pieces, it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The second number indicates the piece quantity. Okay, so in here, if we set the quantity to be 4 for some reason, okay, you can see the number change to be 4. Okay, if I change the quantity per bundle to be 2, it will change it back to 2. Okay. Now, basically, in the system you only see 1, but when you create the marker file, because you require to, it'll give you 2 pieces. If you want to see the opposite piece, we call it scatter piece. You could come to the piece menu and say scatter piece. and it'll show you both pieces. And here you can see in the piece bar in the parentheses is showing you 2, indicating that you're seeing both pieces. Okay. If you make changes on one side, so I make changes here, you'll make changes on the opposite side. Okay. All right, let me show you how to do a couple things. Okay. First thing you might need to do is import. Okay. And after you import, you need to here. Let me open up a style first. Let me go to our examples and open up a file, styles, and then I don't know. Let's go women's and whatever. Let's go dress. Whatever. Okay. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to export. Okay. Now, when you're exporting, DXF is some people call it data exchange format, or is a universal language between different CAD systems. Okay. Now, there's different DXFs. You have the DXF, AAMA DXF, ASTM DXF. Okay? So early, probably late 70s, early 80s, the first format is DXF that came out. Between 80s, 90s is AAMA, and then the latest will be ASTM DXF format. Okay. Now the difference is information. Okay, so if I was to come here with the layers, if I select the DXF, you can see what information is going out. You have boundary, which is the pattern piece outlines, and then you have some internals, drill holes, notches, and grain line and soul line. Okay. Now, if you select AAMA, then you get some curve points and turn backs and whatever. Okay. The latest and the best format will be ASTM, and you can see this has more notch types and different properties that information regarding the pattern goes out. Now, depending on the person you're sending it to, they also need to be able to export that same version. When you export, it's going to be all the same format. It's going to be it's just going to say DXF. It's not going to say ASTM, DXF, or etc. But you should know which format you're sending it to. Okay? So in our system, if I say I want to export ASTM DXF, then it's asking you, do you want to export both lines, which is the soul line and the cut line? Basically, when you have simulants, that's exporting both lines. You have your soul finish measurement, and then you have your cut line where the patterns are being cut. Okay, a scale factor should be 1. Okay, and basically you could select where you want to save it to. So if I come here and I'm going to just make a new folder, call it export. Okay, and it should give you the name because I deleted my folder. I'm just gonna label it inside. It should automatically come with the style name, but I changed my folder and deleted something, so it's not there. I'm gonna select that, say OK. Now it's going to ask you, do you want to export all the pieces only on the work area, current piece? Okay, you shouldn't really export pieces separately. You'll create each individual DXF files as each piece, but some systems that's piece-based, it might be okay. Okay, but okay. So if I come here in the export folder, where is my export folder? Oh, here it is. Okay, I have 2 files. Okay, I have the DXF and I have the RUL. Now, RUL is the grading information. Okay, so when you need to import this back in, okay, because from your current system, we need to export out, and then we're going to have to import it in. After you import it in, you're going to have to do some cleanup. So here, if I come here, say import, I select the same file, right? I'm going to say that, say open, and I'm going to say okay. Now it looks different, okay? So basically, every CAD system programs differently, okay? So the way we program our simulants is different from Gerber, Lectra, Optitex, or StyleCAD, or PASS system, okay? So every CAD system recognizes the contour line and internal lines. So our digital simulants gets converted to be internal lines. See this blue line, okay? When you double click on this internal line, okay, you get the internal information, and you can see there's different properties: draw, cut, solve. Because this used to be a simulants, we have it as a solve property, okay? If it's a style line, it might be a draw, it might be a cut line. Basically, this information is driving the automatic cutting machines. So if it says cut, then the cutting machine will actually cut this outside after. So it's going to cut 2 times. Okay. If it says draw on the cutting machine, it's not going to do anything. Okay. So if you say none, it's for your reference. Okay. You can see on screen, but when you plot anything with a non property, it will not plot, it will not go out, or it won't even export. It shouldn't export. Okay. So first thing I like to do is, if I come to Tools menu, I want to make sure Auto Create Reference Block is on. Okay. So every pattern piece gets what we call a reference block. When you make a pattern change, it creates the original outline, and then you could compare it to see what changes you're making to what it was before, right? So if you make any changes, you could compare what the shape was previously. Okay? So before I make any changes, I want to come to Tools menu, Auto Create Reference Block is on. Okay, I like to do Control A, which is to select all. This is a Windows. We like to use much Windows keyboard shortcuts as possible. So if I do Control A, see it selects everything. Okay? So if I do Control A, it selects all my pieces that's on the work area, and then I'm going to come to the point menu and points cleanup. Now, if you look, there's a lot of extra points that are created, because when you're exporting, we want to make sure the shape is there. You don't lose any kind of shape, so additional points are being created. Okay, so I'm going to do Control A, and I want to do some points cleanup. Okay, so once I do that, it reduces the number of points that I don't need from the system. Now, while this is still selected, I want to convert all this internal soul line to be back to my digital simulants. Okay, so if I come to my scene menu, we have this function called soul internal to scene. Okay, so this process is importing the styles back in, and you're cleaning it up so we can work with it. Okay, so when you say soul internal to scene, while all the pieces is selected, see, it gets converted to be my digital simulants now. Okay, and then I need to come here and say switch all to soul, because when you're working, you want to work with your finish measurement, which is the soul line. Simulants is it's just an operation, right? Depending on what sewing machine you're using, if you're using a overlock or single needle, whatever, you need different values for that, right? So I'm going to switch, and when you're working on the soul line, when the digital simulants is outside, okay, on the bottom status bar, I don't know if you guys can see, it says soul on it. Okay, if you're working on the cut line, F5 to switch, it says you're working on the cut line. Okay, you should be always working on the soul line in our system. Okay, so once that's done, I like to what we call say manual reseam. Okay, so when you say reseam, just to make sure the simulants doesn't change, okay, when you import it in, maybe sometimes there's a special corner or something like that that the seam allowance might change the shape to. So when you say reseam, okay, and then this is now we're going to check with the reference block. When you say view reference, okay, you can see there's a slight change, right? It increased a little bit compared to what it was, okay? So you can kind of see the difference, okay? If it isn't too much, you don't really have to worry about as much, okay? So if I double click here, maybe it was because it needed to be 0.5 when you say apply. No, that's too much, okay? So maybe it was a 0.45 for some reason, okay? So you might need to just grab the seam tool and just redo it. Okay. Apply. Okay. So I'm not sure what exactly is going on here. It has some different seam value for this pattern for some reason. Either way, so this is how you could QC and you could try to match up if it had a special corner or not. Okay. So if you come here, you could say if we had like a turn back, then you could say turn back corners. So you have like a little bit different shape and you matching up as best as possible. Okay. I'm not sure why this pattern, the semblance is a little bit really off. Okay. So you check every pattern and then once it's checked, you might make some changes and you want to create a new reference line, right? So I'm going to do Control A and you could come to edit menu and say remove reference blocks, right? So once everything's checked, verified, then you can remove the reference blocks and then save it, okay? So I'm just going to put this on the desktop and save this. And then if you make any more changes now, you'll create me some new reference lines, right? So if I come here and if I need to extend this out, maybe 2 inches, something like that, then I have a reference line, new one. And when you double click on this reference, see it says reference line, it shows you the date and the time when it was created. Any questions for importing and cleaning up the information? Okay. Now, when you're drafting some lines, and let me come back here, draft and move setup. Okay. So here, I have this thing called create point on snap contour, and I say always, okay. By default, it's by confirmation and make possible point connection by confirmation. Okay, so which means if you click on this line here, okay, and say okay, you'll get this. Do you want to add a point on snap contour? So contour is a line, right? So where I click here, where I snap to add this internal line, it's asking, do I want to add a point there? If I say okay, then you make me a point. Okay. If I come here and if I say no, it didn't make me a point. Okay. So when there's a point there, basically earlier I showed you that the internal lines have points, right? So you have the external point and internal point together when you say add a point. Okay. And when you double click here, it will say connected. Okay, so this internal point and the external point are connected, linked. So which means if I was to make changes by moving this point, see the internal point moves. Okay, now if it's not connected, if I double click here, and if I move my external point, see the internal point doesn't move with it. Okay. That's how I was able to, earlier when I was drafting and I created my points of measure, I have my internal point and the external point connected. So when I was reducing the internal line measurements, it was pulling on the external contact with it. Okay, so if I do Shift F8, earlier F8 was to show external measurement. If you add a shift to that, it'll show you your internal measurements. So basically, if you come here, do Control Enter, it's 8.3 something. If you to say I need this to be 8 inches, and as long as it's connected, it's going to pull. But this end doesn't have connection, right? So I could. There's no point here. So if I need to connect everything, I could say global. Come to the point menu and say global checkpoint connection. It'll add me a point, and it'll be connected. So now I have a point there, right? And if I want to reduce this to be 8 inches, and if I say move both, okay, I have both horizontal here. Unless you want to move diagonal. So horizontal is going straight, right? Left and right. Diagonal is whatever angle is at. I have a small angle here, so if you need to move it at an angle, you could say move in both diagonal direction. Or if you want to go just like this to make it 8 inches, then you can say both horizontal and say apply, and it moves to make sure the line becomes 8 inches. Okay. So basically, like I said earlier, patterns are lines and curved lines, and it's by measurements, right? If you try and fit somebody, you first get the points of measure, key points of measure, and then it's a matter of shaping properly to get the proper fit for that user. Okay. I'm pretty sure you're not going to be plotting or anything like that. So first thing we kind of learned about how to import into points, cleanup, etc. Right. Next thing is you might need to do seam allowance. Okay. So usually there's always a common seam value, 1/2 inch all around, and then maybe the hem and the neckline might be 1/4 inch or 1 inch or whatever different ones, right? So you could come to the seam menu and global seam. Okay. So you could say all pieces on the work area, all the pieces are already in work area, or if you have some on the work area and the piece part, then you could say all pieces in the file, and then you could change everything to be, let's go with 3/8, okay, 3/8. Okay. And then you could go with the seam tool, and you could change to whatever you need. Okay. Now you could do it this way, or we also have, if you right mouse click, we have quick seam. Okay. So when you select quick seam, basically you could select the line and you'll quickly change that value. If you need to change the value, you have to hold the control key, and when you click on the line, you can say 1 inch. Okay, so it'll become 1 inch, and then now it's remembering 1 inch until you change the value again. So you could click here, that'll be 1 inch. Okay, I don't know if I need 1 inch there. Now, if I need to make it 1/4 inch or 3/8 or something like that, I could click here and say 0.25. Say OK, and just click on this. This is going by between gray point to gray point. Okay, so depending on what you need to do, I have to click 1, 2, 3, 4 to make 1/4 inch. That seems a little bit longer than if I were to grab my seam tool. Okay, if I grab my seam tool, I can select this point to this point and say 0.25, and it'll just do my line. So it depends how you feel, whichever is faster, you could do it that way. Okay. So I could come here, select here, and say 1/4 inch, or I could use my quick seam. Okay. If you double click, it'll do all around. I don't know if I need 1/4 inch for this pieces, but whatever. Okay. So whatever feels faster for you. Okay. This will delete the seam, remove seam. So if you want to remove seam on certain, if you need this to be raw edge for some reason, you could just remove the smallest there. Okay. Now, sometimes when you're importing the pattern, maybe it was a digitized pattern and there's no seam allowance at all, right? So let me switch all to cut, and I'm going. So I'm assuming everything's on the cut line now. I'm going to say delete seam. Okay. So all the seam allowance are gone. Okay. So sometimes you might get this type of file which is on the cut line, but as long as you know what the seam values are, you could always recreate the sew line. Okay. So seam allowance, when you give a positive number, is adding. If you say minus, it's going to take away. Right. So if I come here into seam menu, global seam, so this is to redefine the sew line. Okay. Like I say, all pieces. I think I did 3/8, so I'm going to say minus 3/8. Okay. So it's all now minus, and it's going inside. And then I think the hem was 1 inch, right? So I could come here and say I need to do minus 1 inch. Okay. When you're on the cut line and when you try to add this to be 1 inch, it's going to give you an error message because you cannot have both negative and positive value, right? So okay, it needs to be minus 1 inch, so it goes inside. Okay. And if I believe this was 1/4 inch, so basically you need to redefine the sew line. So I'm going in there and redefining the sew line. How much? Okay. All right, and then afterwards, when you redefine everything, I think I did all 1/4 inch here, so minus 0.25, and also this one I think I did 1/4 inch, so minus 0.25. Then afterwards, once everything's verified, then you could come to seam menu and switch all to sew, and it'll be working on the sew line. Basically, in our 3D system, we're working on the sew line. We don't deal with the cut line. So that's how it's stitched up in 3D. So you don't even see cut line coming in. Everything needs to be working on the sew line. So, okay. So if you're importing in and if it has both lines, then you could convert the internal line to be a seam allowance and then switch to sew line. If you import something in and there's no sew line, then you're going to have to redefine the sew line by putting negative value and switching it out. I think I forgot to mention how to select the line. Okay. So the way we select the line is you have to click and hold a point, okay? And when you move the mouse, you get this red drag line, okay? And then when you get to the end of the point, see how the point turns red? I don't know, let me zoom in. So once you get near it, it should turn red, and when you release, then you'll select the line, okay? So the reason you have to hold, only with the select tool you have to do this, okay? Because when you click and click, it deselects and selects a new thing. So this is the reason why you have to click and hold. Every other tool, you don't have, like move parallel, right? If you click, you don't have to hold the mouse. You just click and then you click when you're in a tool function. Okay, but only with the select tool, because select tool allows you to select, right? So you're selecting different objects, internal lines. You could select the green line. Okay. And one more thing, sometimes you need to match point to point. Maybe you need to join the side seam arm all together or something like that. we have this tool called Move Piece. So you select the tool and you can select point and you can match it to the other point. Okay. The keyboard shortcut for that is the space bar. So you have to make sure you're on top of the point. So don't move the mouse. You space bar, it picks it up where the cursor is, and then you move the mouse and left click to place it.